Good morning, dear students. I am Dr. Yashik Bansal, Assistant Professor in the Department of Microbiology. Starting this new session, I've decided to upload all the classes on YouTube because some of the students complained of poor internet connectivity because they were staying in these remote areas and border areas with Nepal or China. So I do not want any student to miss out on any part of this class because of poor internet connectivity. I don't have much gadgets and time at my disposal, so I'll be making the entire video in one single go. So if there are any errors or if there are any other issues, so please forgive me for that. So today's theory class is on laboratory diagnosis of bacterial infections. I have been asked to cover only two aspects of the laboratory diagnosis: specimen collection and direct demonstration of bacteria. So rest of the topics will be covered in your subsequent theory classes. Let's begin with this one. So the content in this presentation will include the introduction and purpose, the basic overview of diagnosis, which involves three components: pre-analytical, analytical and post-analytical. Then we'll discuss the methods of diagnosis, which will include specimen collection and transport, and direct demonstration using microscopy. So to begin with, the patient suffering from an infectious disease needs to be treated for two basic purposes. First is to alleviate the suffering of the patient, and the second purpose is to contain the spread of the disease, because an infectious disease will spread from one patient to another. Then infectious diseases are usually attributable to a variety of agents such as bacterial, fungal, viral or parasitic. The scope of today's presentation only restricts us to the bacterial component. The treatment of bacterial infections depends upon successful identification of the causative agent, and for successful identification, the hospital staff and healthcare workers have to work as a team together, and a successful diagnosis can be made on the basis of combination of clinical parameters, laboratory parameters with respect to the pathology and biochemistry laboratories, and lastly the microbiology examination. The purpose served by microbiological testing are many. First is it will help us identify the causative agent or the bacteria that is causing the disease in the patient. Second, it will help us in treatment based upon the data we generate after antimicrobial susceptibility testing or AST. Then it will help us in surveillance in the community and hospitals for outbreak investigations. For example, if we suspect that in the community we are getting a cluster of cases presenting with rice watery diarrhea, so we can suspect that there could be an outbreak of cholera. For this, we'll do a outbreak investigation. We'll collect water specimen, we'll take stool specimen of the patients, we'll try to isolate Vibrio cholerae in a microbiology laboratory. Then to start post-exposure prophylaxis. For example, a healthcare professional was taking a blood specimen, and while taking blood, he accidentally got a needle stick injury. In such cases, we can do a pre-test counseling of the exposed individual, and along with that we can do testing of the source or the patient from whom this healthcare professional got a needle stick injury. So if the source is, say, hepatitis B positive, then post-exposure prophylaxis can be initiated in this exposed healthcare professional. Lastly, to initiate appropriate infection control measures in the hospital. For example, we get two patients who are in whom we have isolated methicillin resistant Staphylococcus aureus. So prompt infection control practices or infection control, so the infection control team needs to visit this ward or ICU wherever the patients are presenting from, and then we need to identify the source of this MRSA that the patients have acquired. Methods of bacterial diagnosis. So as I have already told you, it starts with the collection of an appropriate specimen, then it is transported to the laboratory where we do a variety of tests ranging from direct demonstration of the parasite, of the bacteria. Then we can do culture, in which we will put up some artificial media. Then once the bacteria grows after suitable incubation conditions and duration, we will identify this bacteria either by using conventional biochemical reactions or using some newer automated techniques such as Vitek2 or MALDI-TOF. MALDI-TOF, Vitek2, these are beyond the scope of your MBBS curriculum. You can just say that there are certain automated methods of identification. Apart from identification, we'll put up antimicrobial susceptibility testing. AST will help us know what drugs are showing as susceptible during the in vitro testing and what drugs are resistant. So based on this data, we will select the most appropriate antimicrobial agent and start treating the patient. Then serological diagnosis, in which we do antigen antibody reactions, and lastly we have molecular methods that include PCR, etc. Specimen collection and transport. It is very important for successful identification of the causative agent. The type of specimen to collect should be clearly understood. For example, if a patient comes with a surgical site infection and we see that there are minor exudates or very minor collection around the wound, then the suitable specimen would be a pus swab. But if the patient presents with an abscess, it is always best to aspirate this pus and then send that for culture rather than simply taking a swab. Then the method and timing of collection. Method and timing are important. If we are collecting a blood culture for identification of bloodstream infections, it is very important to collect the specimen after preparing the skin for appropriate collection of the specimen. Then timing. Timing is important because usually many of the microbiology laboratories do not work around the clock in many hospitals. So you need to be aware of the suitable timing for collection. It is always best to collect a fresh specimen and send it immediately for testing to the microbiology laboratory. But during certain times, we may have to collect the specimen and store it in our ward, because the patient, for example, if a patient comes with bloodstream infection and the patient's condition is quite serious, we may need to start antimicrobial therapy empirical antibiotic therapy as soon as possible. So in this case, delaying the specimen collection is of disadvantage. So we need to collect the specimen as early as possible. So here we'll try to collect the specimen and either send it to the laboratory, or we can keep it in our ward and see how early we can send it for testing. Factors influencing the results. I have already discussed one of these factors, for example, antibiotic intake. In your routine clinical practice, you will come across many patients who have already tried various antimicrobials or antibiotics by consuming them over the counter from the chemist. So if a patient comes to you and you want to get a culture sensitivity testing done, it is very important to document the type of antibiotic that the patient has consumed and the duration of that antibiotic, and lastly the interval between the last dose and specimen collection. Prompt and appropriate transport. We can either send if the laboratory is located within the hospital premises, we can collect the specimen and send it immediately to the laboratory. But at certain times, the laboratory where we intend to get the test done is located at a remote place. So in those cases, we may need to see how to transport the specimen appropriately, or by adding some suitable preservative to the specimen. Then appropriate storage if there is delay in transport. A specimen for microbiology culture and sensitivity testing should preferably be refrigerated unless contraindicated. For example, CSF and these sputum specimen, they should preferably be not kept under refrigeration. Then as I've already discussed, this is a team effort, so it is always good to involve the laboratory in specimen at the time of specimen collection in certain special tests. For example, if you want to do an anaerobic culture, it is always best to inform the laboratory beforehand, and you have to collect the specimen either in a Robertson cooked meat medium or any medium that can ensure anaerobiasis, because if you take the specimen but do not ensure anaerobiasis, by the time the specimen reaches the laboratory and is put up for anaerobic culture, the anaerobic organism may already have been exposed to oxygen for a sufficient duration of time, which will impact the results of your anaerobic culture. So the collection of specimen should be done using standard precautions. It is advisable to wear gloves. If you have used any syringe, then you have to dispose this syringe as per the hospital biomedical waste disposal protocols. Before commencing antibiotic therapy, this is very important. You have to collect the specimen before starting antimicrobials. Otherwise, the cultures may come as sterile. You should know what specimen to collect. For example, I've already discussed that swabs can be collected, but they are not as good as tissue, body fluid or aspirate, especially when you are trying to test for mycological pathogens. You should avoid contamination of specimen with the commensal or resident flora. In many of the sites, especially the upper respiratory tract and the urinary while collecting urine specimen, midstream urine for culture, it is quite common to see the specimen getting contaminated with this commensal flora. So you have to take care while collecting the specimen that the contamination with commensal flora should either be avoided or minimized as much as possible. Then some specimen, for example, ocular specimen, corneal scrapings, these are usually plated at the patient's bedside itself. The ophthalmologists usually ask us to provide them with the culture media, and the specimen are directly inoculated on these culture media. The corneal scrapings etc. are usually smeared on slides and then they are sent to us for microscopy. Specimen for microbiology culture and sensitivity testing are collected in sterile containers. These containers should be wide mouthed, screw capped, leak proof, and they should not be soiled with the specimen from their exteriors, because in those conditions, if the patient's attendant is taking the specimen or whosoever is transporting the specimen from the bed and this patient's bedside to the laboratory may get exposed. Never add formalin to the tissue specimen. This has been practically seen by me on many occasions. Whenever we send tissue specimen for histopathological examination, the specimen are sent in formalin. But it is important to know that while sending the specimen for microbiology culture, it should not be sent in formalin. If you are sending a tissue specimen, then you should put saline, this tissue in saline. And secondly, the container that you are using should be a sterile one. For histopathology, a clean container is sufficient, but for microbiology testing, the container must be sterile. Then identify the specimen appropriately. Label it with either the patient's name, age, gender, ward, and most importantly, patient's hospital unique ID or whatever it is called at your place. or in many of the laboratories with modern facilities, the patient's specimen are directly barcoded. This helps in easy identification of the patient specimen. Then store and transport as per protocol for that particular specimen. We have already discussed some specimens should be stored and transported under refrigeration, while others should be kept and transported at room temperature. Take into consideration the location of the laboratory, whether the laboratory is located in-house or in the nearby vicinity of your hospital, or whether the laboratory is located at a remote location. Specimen transport. The transportation of the specimen should ideally be done as soon as possible or as early as possible. But certain specimen, most of the specimen for microbiology culture and sensitivity can be conveniently sent to the laboratory within 2 hours. But there are certain exceptions. If you are sending any CSF specimen, body fluid, ocular specimen, bone specimen, tissue specimen, or a urine specimen without preservative, you should send the specimen preferably within 15 minutes. Then for 30 minutes or up to 1 hour, you can utilize this time frame for stool specimen. You should note that if you take beyond 30 minutes, then the chances of demonstrating motile trophozoites in this specimen will reduce. Also, respiratory specimen should preferably be transported within 30 minutes. Then certain specimen for serological testing of various bacterial infections, nasopharyngeal swabs in viral transport media, these can be transported and these can be stored for up to 24 hours under refrigeration at 2 to 8 degrees Celsius. So in various types of infections, various specimen can be collected. For example, if in case of bloodstream infections, sepsis, endocarditis, we can collect paired blood culture specimen. For these, blood culture bottles have to be sourced from the microbiology laboratory, and appropriate quantity of blood is to be added to these bottles. The dilution of blood ranges anywhere from 1:5 to 1:10. So 8 to 10 ml of blood is collected and in case of adults and is transferred to these blood culture bottles. As I have already told you that these specimens should be collected after preparing the skin. We have to disinfect the skin appropriately using a two-step method, first with alcohol followed by chlorhexidine. Then in case of infectious diseases requiring serology, a 2 ml or 3 ml blood is sufficient for testing. It is collected by the minimal aseptic technique using a one-step disinfection. Then we have to collect the specimen and transport to the laboratory either on an immediate basis, or we can keep this specimen with us under refrigeration for up to 24 hours. Then for diarrheal diseases, the best specimen is either stool or rectal swabs. For meningitis, CSF, infections of other sterile body sites, usually specimen include these body fluids. For example, pleural fluid, synovial fluid, peritoneal fluid. Skin and soft tissue infections, for this we can either take a swab or we can perform an aspiration of the pus. We can take tissue and send it to laboratory for testing. For anaerobic culture, it is important to know that swabs and sputum specimen are not recommended and not appropriate specimen for testing. The results will not be suitable for interpretation. In these cases, we should only take either aspirate tissue specimen, blood, sterile body fluids, or bone marrow for testing. For upper respiratory tract infection, throat swabs with membrane over the tonsil, nasopharyngeal swab, or pernasal swab can be collected and sent to the laboratory. For lower respiratory tract infection, tracheal aspirate, sputum, bronchoalveolar lavage, lung biopsy, these can be done. For pulmonary tuberculosis, a sputum specimen should be collected as per the NTEP guidelines. We should collect at least 2 sputum specimen for testing. Then in case of infants and young children who are unable to produce sputum and give a sample, we can perform gastric aspirate. For urinary tract infections, a midstream urine, suprapubic urine aspirate. Then for catheterized patients, we have to note that specimen should never be collected from the urinary bag or the uro bag, and the specimen is to be collected from the catheter tube. For genital specimen, we have to collect cervical swabs, urethral swabs. Exudates from genital ulcers can directly be obtained on the slides. For ocular infections, conjunctival swabs, corneal scrapings. Then we can take aqueous or vitreous fluid for culture examination, culture and microscopic examination. Then ear infections, swabs and aspirates. Next topic is direct detection or microscopy. It is an indispensable technique regardless of whatever advancement we make in microbiology. Light microscope, fluorescent microscope, phase contrast microscope, dark field microscope, electron microscope, LED microscope. There are various types of equipment for microscopy. We even have a confocal microscope that allows us to see the causative agent in vivo, that is directly on the patient. Confocal microscopy is very useful for corneal ulcers. For light microscope, bacteria need to be stained to enhance the contrast. For staining, first we will prepare a smear, we will heat fix it, then perform different staining techniques that I am going to discuss in the subsequent slides. Other methods include examination after preparing a mount using a cover slip. So microscopy involves two basic methods. First is preparing a smear and staining it. For stained preparations, usually the examination is done in the using the 100x objective. The final magnification during such microscopy is 1000 times, and we have to use either immersion oil or cedar wood oil, or the Canada balsam is used only in case of silver impregnation technique. Mount examination. For mount examination, we have two main lenses, 10x and 40x objective. So the magnification will be accordingly. For 10x objective, the magnification will be 100 times. For 40x objective, the magnification will be 400 times. So the stain preparations include methylene blue stain, Grams stain, Zn stain, Albert stain, and silver impregnation method. Whereas mount examination includes wet mount or saline mount, iodine mount, potassium hydroxide or KOH mount, negative staining using the Indiang staining, and hanging drop preparation. Over here we need to be aware of the utility of various mounts. Wet mount can be done for any type of specimen, for example, for seeing the pus cells or bacteria in a urine specimen. Saline mount, wet mount, iodine mount, these can be used for stool examination as well, for demonstration of various parasites, ova, cyst, larva, or trophozoites. KOH examination is done for demonstration of fungal elements. Negative staining, Indiang staining, is used for demonstration of capsule. Then hanging drop preparation is done to see the type of motility. It is very important examination whenever we are suspecting Vibrio cholerae in the patient's specimen, because it will show darting motility on hanging drop. In your last class or theory class that I took, I apologize, in the last practical that I took, I have already discussed Gram staining, Zeden staining and Hilbert staining. In Gram's staining, we have 3-4 things that we will be studying. First is principle, procedure, uses, and then precautions or misinterpretations. So starting with the principle, there are 2 theories. First is the cell wall theory and second is the pH theory. In the pH theory, it is said that certain bacteria have a more acidic cytoplasm. So the binding with the basic dyes will be stronger in case of these bacteria. Secondly, certain bacteria have a thick peptidoglycan layer in their cell wall, which is usually 50 to 100 layer thick. And they also have teichoic acid in their cell wall. So the resulting complex that is formed after the iodine step on for simplifying as of now, just remember that the resulting complex that will form after this staining with the primary stain will be strong enough that will resist decolorization when we add acetone or methanol or other alcohols. So this is the principle of Gram stain, that certain bacteria have a more acidic cytoplasm, they have a thick peptidoglycan layer in their cell wall, and they have teichoic acid in their cell wall. So because of this, they will bind the primary stain and resist decolorization. Procedure will be taught during the practical exercise in your practicals. It is a very simple procedure. We'll prepare a heat fixed slide. First we will put up the primary stain crystal violet for 1 minute. Then we will decant it. We will add iodine, let it stain for 1 minute. Then again we will decant it and then we will gently wash it under water. Then we will add a decolorizer such as acetone, which is a strong decolorizer and should be exposed only for 2 to 3 seconds, not more than that. Or methanol, which can be added for up to 20 to 30 seconds. So once decolorization is done, we will do a counter staining step using safranin for 30 seconds. Gram positive bacteria will appear as purple in color, whereas gram negative bacteria will appear pink in color. Also, you have to understand the difference between principle and procedure. You should never mix these two whenever you are giving your viva examination during practicals. If the examiner has asked you regarding the this principle, just talk about the cell wall theory and the pH theory. Uses. Gram stain is an important technique. It will help us identify gram positive or gram negative bacteria in the patient specimen. It can help us presumptively identify gram positive bacteria or gram negative bacteria in the culture. Then third, it helps us direct the empirical antibiotic therapy based on the demonstration of gram positive or gram negative bacteria in the patient specimen. Precautions. The decolorization step is the most important step in case of gram stain. I'll take a break for 5 seconds. I need to see whether it is still recording or not. Okay, so we are still recording. In precautions, we have to understand certain things. First is the decolorization step is the most important step, because if we are using acetone and we expose the slide for even slightly greater duration of say 5 or 6 seconds, this duration is sufficient to cause the bacteria to get decolorized. So even gram positive bacteria will appear as gram negative. So the examiner might ask you conditions in which gram positive bacteria may appear as gram negative and conditions in which gram negative bacteria may appear as gram positive. Gram positive bacteria appearing as gram negative could be because the slide was over decolorized. Second, the patient could be on beta lactam antibiotics, so the cell wall in the bacteria could be weak. Lastly, in old cultures, many of the times the staining is not, a primary stain is not retained and the bacteria get decolorized. So these are 3 conditions that I recollect in which gram-positive bacteria may appear as gram-negative. And conditions in which gram-negative bacteria may appear as gram-positive. These include, first is if the iodine preparation is old. In those cases, gram-negative bacteria will appear as gram-positive. Secondly, most of the time students say that under decolorization could have been done. It is usually not the case. If decolorization has been entirely skipped, then gram-negative bacteria may appear as gram-positive. Second is Ziehl-Neelsen staining or acid-fast staining. Principle is very important. Certain bacteria have mycolic acid in their cell wall, so they will bind the primary stain carbylfuchsin and resist decolorization using acids. Not only bacteria, there are certain other structures as well that will take up this acid-fast stain. Examples of these include the coccidian parasites and spores. Procedure will be shown during the practical exercise. Uses. Zn stain is an important staining technique that we are using for demonstration of Mycobacterium in the clinical specimen. There are 3 main categories of Mycobacterium that you'll be studying in your MBBS curriculum. First is Mycobacterium tuberculosis and related bacteria. Then Mycobacterium leprae. And lastly, we have non-tuberculous mycobacteria. Uses. We have already discussed, we can use Zn staining for demonstration of acid-fast organisms. We'll list these organisms while we are discussing the modifications. Modifications are many. First is the cold method or the Kinyon method, in which we need not heat the carbylfuchsin during the first step of staining. Second is when we can use acid alcohol as a decolorizer. Instead of using a 20% or 25% sulfuric acid, we'll use 3% HCl in 97% alcohol. Third modification is using different second counter stain. Instead of methylene blue, we can use malachite green or even picric acid. Lastly, we have different concentrations of sulfuric acid that we have to use for different organisms. For Mycobacterium tuberculosis, we use 20% sulfuric acid, or in the NTEP documents, it is mentioned as 25%. 5% sulfuric acid is used for Mycobacterium leprae. 1% is used for Nocardia, which is a gram-positive branched filamentous bacteria. We use 0.5% to 1% for coccidian parasites, Cryptosporidium parvum, Isospora and Cyclospora. Lastly, we have 0.25% concentration for spores. Precautions. The first step of staining using carbylfuchsin is the most important step, because while we are staining the smear with carbylfuchsin, we need to heat the stain, taking care not to boil the specimen. Boil the stain. Once the boiling of this staining reagent occurs, there will be deposits on the slide and will not be able to visualize the acid-fast organisms in the slide. Last is Albert staining. Albert staining is done for demonstration of metachromatic granules of Corynebacterium diphtheriae. In my theory class of morphology of bacteria, I have already discussed Albert stain. I have already shown you photographs of gram-positive organisms, gram-negative organisms. I have shown you photographs of acid-fast bacteria, Mycobacterium tuberculosis. They are long, thin, slender, slightly curved, have a beaded appearance, and they appear as reddish colored bacilli in the smear of the patient. For performing Albert stain, we have two reagents, Albert A, Albert 1 and Albert 2. In Albert 1, we have a solution of toluidine blue, malachite green, glacial acetic acid, alcohol and distilled water. Whereas Albert 2 contains iodine in potassium iodide. The staining technique is very simple. We'll take a heat fixed smear, put Albert 1 solution for 4 to 5 minutes, followed by Albert 2 solution for say 1 to 2 minutes. Thank you.